Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the final unit in the Lunch and Learn series, which we're focusing very much for LGAQ today on meetings and actually more specifically how to actually run more effective meetings. As I've said many times, we are all in the business of attending many meetings. This is a meeting. After this meeting, you're probably going to another meeting and then another meeting and then another meeting, and it never ends. So life's just one long meeting punctuated by breaks. But I think if we think about it, all of us as leaders have to run some of these meetings, and getting good at running a meeting is extremely important. And it's not some great skill that can't be learned. It's reasonably easy. There's just a few principles that have to be considered. So I think it's important that we have a look at some of those and what they mean. So that's pretty much what today is about. So as the normal process, please type in some questions that you might have. I just want to make sure I'm coming across loud and clear. Could people just type in clear or something like that, please? Otherwise, I'm again talking to myself, and I don't want to do that. So, yeah, good. Thank you, Marie. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kylie. Okay, sounds like I'm coming across well. All right, so let's get underway and look at this very interesting subject of meetings and how we might best run meetings. And of course, what will happen is you'll probably get a little bit more critical now of the meetings that you have to attend that you're not actually running, because you'll know some of the things that should and shouldn't happen. Anyway, let's get underway. So as you can see from the program, we are at the end of our series, and I've really enjoyed working with all of you. And again, there will still be homework to do, but I'm more than happy to stay in contact with you. And if you've got questions or comments you'd like to share, then send me an email. I'm more than happy to look at those. So we've started right at the beginning talking about feedback and how important it was. Several months ago, we talked about our influencing profile and the importance that we're all in the business in local government of influence. And we talked about optimising team performance, in particular having the conversation and developing a dialogue with each of your team members. Getting the best out of people is probably, if you're in the leadership role, is what you get paid to do. And it doesn't mean getting 100% improvement. It just might mean getting a small improvement like 10%, but that becomes the name of the game. We looked at understanding people and their personalities, and I guess, all of that was based on the platinum rule, which is treat people how they want to be treated, rather than the golden rule, which is treat people how you want to be treated, which is kind of like how most of us have been brought up. All right, so, and now of course we're on to meetings. So I wonder how you went with your profile or your homework. I asked you to consider and observe people and consider their personality types and the people that you lead, and try and vary your approach. So if you've got any comment you want to make about that, by all means type it in the question box. But at the end of the day, I hope the very least I could do for you in that last session was to sensitize you to the need to look at people slightly differently, so that you could understand where they're coming from, which is critically important. All right, so yeah, it's all about the golden rule, or should I say it's all about the platinum rule. Treat people how they want to be treated, rather than treating people how you want to be treated. And that's the secret of it, very much so. So today we're going to look at a number of issues. We'll look at the context of meetings. So we'll look at how meetings are structured, and we'll look at some of the interpersonal and leadership skills that you can apply in meetings. And I'm going to give you a couple of very practical ideas that I know work in local government, about ideas about enriching your meetings, making them more lively and engaging and more productive for everybody. So we'll look at all of those 4 things in this short broadcast. So look, let me start by saying this, and I think it's really very important that getting good at running productive meetings, I think, is one of the most critical and untapped skill of any leader. And the reason for that is, of course, leaders are in the business of running meetings in lots of ways. So there's no reason why you and I can't become very good at running meetings, particularly when there's only a few things we have to do slightly differently in order to make those meetings more effective. So let's think about how we might do that, because as I said before, our life is pretty much one long meeting punctuated by a whole lot of other things. But at the end of the day, local government, as much as any other industry on the planet, just runs from meeting to meeting to meeting and never ends. So the least we can do is perhaps make the meetings more engaging and productive and enjoyable. So I'm hoping I can help you with that. All right, now here's a thought, and I want you to think about this because I think sometimes people get confused about meetings and what their purpose is. But meetings themselves are in themselves not productive. Have you ever thought about that? It's actually what happens or doesn't happen between meetings that determines the effectiveness of the meeting. So all meetings really do is to create priorities and actions to be completed after the meeting, before the next meeting. So really, you know, to talk about productive meetings is really talking about meetings that are effective in creating actions that occur subsequent to the meeting. So that's very important, and of course we spend our whole life in meetings, so in some senses we really don't get much done. So it's important that we actually create there are differences that happen as a result of the meetings themselves. So just something to think about before we move on any further. The meetings themselves are just an organising tool. They're not really productive in themselves. Some meetings can be, in the sense that it might be about sharing different points of view, or it might be educating people about a topic or an issue. But at the end of the day, the education itself is not as important as what you do with it and how you might apply it, or a new understanding about how somebody might feel about an issue that's been learned through a meeting is really going to be, it's really about what happens as a result of that new understanding that becomes critically important. So, which brings us to, what do meetings actually do? I mean, you know, why do we sit around? Normally they are seated. Why do we sit around and have meetings? What's all that about? Well, there's a number of reasons, and have a think about, you know, you might want to think about in your local government organisation how many of these types of meetings you have and how many of them are productive, and or could you be having more of different types. But some meetings are there to inform. So if you've got new legislation coming in, there might be a briefing session where we're informing people about how that new legislation might be affecting local government and, you know, how it might affect the way people conduct their business. So we have information meetings, and normally those meetings are one way, in the sense that the meetings are very much about the presenter presenting, you know, usually an expert presenting on something. But of course, if we have the town hall meetings, which I know many of you would be familiar with in your own communities, they're usually to inform as well, and often it's a one-way process where the public are actually informing the councillors about what they need or want in their community, rather than the other way around. So that's one particular form of meeting. Another form, or another purpose of a meeting, is that they can educate people. So education's about giving people a new set of skills. I suppose you could argue that what we're doing here in this broadcast is a meeting based on education. So how do we get people to do things differently, faster, easier, quicker, with more direction, with more focus? That's an education meeting. Meetings can also be useful to clarify circumstances and situations. So if, for example, there is an unclear message coming from state government about new developments and how it might impact on a local community, we might have to have a meeting to clarify the direction of state government and where they want to take the community. So very much around clarifying. Some meetings are around engaging people, so getting people involved in problem solving, considering issues from a range of different perspectives, and by doing that we're actually engaging them in the process so that they become part of the solution. So of course there are a lot of community meetings that are about engaging members of the public into the solution. We also have the opportunity to solve problems. So by getting stakeholders together in a room, we can tackle a particular problem or challenge from a number of different perspectives, and that can become very, very useful. We can have, and I think we have too many of these by the way, review meetings, so it's a work in progress meeting. So I might meet every, say, fortnight or even weekly, and then what each person of the team does is simply share with the rest of the team where they're up to on particular projects. Now, I think there's a place for that, but I think we spend too much time in our meetings reviewing progress and not enough time doing other things that I've mentioned earlier. And of course, meetings are there to make decisions, and these decisions can be based on a consensus model where we take the majority of people with us in the meeting. So obviously a council meeting is about, or should be about, making decisions based on consensus. The most votes gets across the line, and that's probably the most high profile meeting that you would have in your own organisation. And but making decisions sometimes gets put off, or it can be very frustrating for people in meetings because decisions aren't being made. So anyway, there is a list of things that you might like to consider about why we meet. So guys, questions, comments, always welcome. So please go ahead and type in any question or comment you might want to make. So there's a variety of reasons for meetings. Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about your own local government organisation, and I want you to think about the cost of what it costs for your organisation to have meetings, because it's pretty scary when you consider it. Here's some sums to think about, and you might want to do this later because you could find this very interesting. So the first thing to work out is, and you could do this just in your team, or you could do this right across the organisation if you chose to do this, but the first thing is to work out what the average income of your team is. Now, you kind of work out what the medium pay scale that people are on, what level they're on, and then you divide by 52 and divide by 24 and come up with an hourly rate. So come up with an hourly rate. So what's everyone's hourly rate? That's the very first key figure that you need to come up with. Then what you do is you ask yourself the question, how many meetings on average do all of your team members attend per week? Now, I'm not just talking about the meetings that you may have with them. I'm talking about the other meetings that they're involved in. I'm also talking about across the organisation and other meetings they're involved in as well. You would be surprised at how many hours a week are spent sitting in meetings. But the next step is to work out what that hourly number is. And of course, not only do we want to know how many meetings, we also want to know how long the meetings go for. Do they go for 1 hour? Do they go for 2 hours? Do they go for 3 hours? How long do these meetings go for? And then you work out how many people are in your team. And then you say, okay, I've got a figure now. I've got a number, because what we do is we multiply that number by the hourly rate and we come up with a figure which shows a weekly figure, and then you multiply it by 52 and you get an annual figure. Now, here's another interesting point. While you're sitting in a meeting, you can't really, unless you're fiddling with your iPhone, you can't really be attending to other business. You can't be meeting your members of the public. You can't be having meetings with your manager. You can't be finishing that report that you started yesterday. There's a whole range of things, of course, that you can't do. So whatever the figure is, you need to double it. Why? Because that's the opportunity cost. So while you're sitting in a meeting, it's not just the hour that's disappeared, if it's an unproductive meeting, but it's also the hour that has to be accounted for where you weren't working on your core priorities. So in fact, a 1 hour meeting is really costing you 2 hours, not 1 hour. 1 hour for being at the meeting and 1 hour lost by not attending to the business that you should be attending to across the organisation. Now let's put some numbers to this. One team I worked with, the average hourly rate was $31.25, which is fairly conservative. That was the hourly rate. Okay. This person attended 5 meetings a week. Okay, 1 meeting a day it worked out to be. This person, each of those meetings lasted approximately 2 hours. So they were in meetings for 10 hours a week. So they did a 40-hour week and 25% of that was taken up by meetings. Actually, as I said, it's quite conservative, and in some cases that could be a lot higher. There are 6 people in this team and each have a similar amount of time and meetings to attend on a weekly basis. So what we did is we doubled the cost, and the figure we came up with 6 people looking at that scenario was $195,000 a year for that team to have people attending meetings. $195,000 a year. So if it's a really easy exercise to do with your team. And what's scary is if we said, righto, let's talk about 1,000 people. Now, most of your local government organisations aren't 1,000 strong, but in fact, the important thing is here that there are organisations of 1,000 strong. So what does that mean in terms of costs? So for an organisation that has 1,000 employees, over the course of a year, using the figures that I've just shown you below, it's costing that organisation $32.5 million a year just to have meetings. Now, obviously, we all know there's a cost associated with meetings, and I personally don't have a problem with that. But if the majority of meetings that these people attend in the 1,000-strong company are a waste of time or really aren't productive or unfocused or excessively long, whatever it might be, if those things are in play, then clearly a lot of that $32.5 million is actually wasted money. So you can see it can be a major issue for an organisation. Okay. Sorry, we do have some organisations that are quite large. Yeah, I get that. Then there is preparation time on top of that. Yeah, well said, Beck. It's not just the meeting, is it? You've got to prepare, so you can add, so that's what I mean. These figures are very conservative. So you could actually add, almost another hour on top of it, on top of each of those meetings for that. Right, and of course, one of the organisations that are in here has 3,500 people. So it'd be an interesting exercise based on the figures that I've given you to work out what it's costing that city council to have meetings a year, just in a general sense, because these figures are fairly conservative. And of course, as you well point out, it doesn't take into account the preparation time. And you've also got to include that when you're preparing for a meeting, you've actually got opportunity costs. So it's really double. So if you spend an hour preparing for a meeting, it's really 2 hours because you're not doing other work while you're doing that. So thanks for that insight. Appreciate that very much. Now, here's a couple of rules of thumb that are very important, and I know some of you might find some of this controversial. I'm only giving you my own opinion about this, and I'm open to suggestions, and if things are working for you in other ways, then continue to do them, of course. But one of my suggestions is not to rotate the chair. A lot of managers will kind of rotate the chair, give everyone in the team an opportunity to basically chair the meeting. Now, they do that on the basis of, and for very good reason, the basis of engaging everybody in the meeting as such. But the truth be known, a lot of people dread chairing the meeting. They don't like doing it. Moreover, they're not particularly good at it. And so what happens is that you run the risk of running several very not such good meetings, and you're sacrificing that for getting people engaged. So I strongly believe that it's the leader's responsibility to be chairing the meeting, and I think that's just a core skill, just as it is your job to be dealing with performance issues. I think it's your job to be dealing with or chairing meetings. And I remember talking to someone in local government, and it'll remain nameless, the organisation, but I remember I was doing some executive coaching with him, and he was a CEO of a smallish council, and I asked him about his meetings, bearing in mind he's the CEO, and I said, well, where do you sit? And he said, oh no, I never sit at the head of the table. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I want to convey a very clear impression that I'm part of the team, and by sitting at the table I feel as if I'm making myself elitist. And I said, what else do you do? And he said, oh, I don't chair the meetings, I rotate the chair. And I said, well, therein lies the problem. I said, one is that people expect you to be sitting at the head of the table because, quite frankly, they expect you to be the leader. They also probably, at that level, that's the executive level, or I would argue any level, they're expecting you to run the meetings. So I think that, I'm a strong believer that a leader should learn the skills of running effective meetings. You can still engage people. That's the nature of your leadership at the head of the table, how you engage people. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you can do to make that happen. All right, so I'm happy to be open to, if someone's got a different point of view, go ahead, because I know it's very common to rotate the chair, but I'm not convinced it works particularly well. Some places it does, but most of the time it doesn't. Okay, let's have a talk about balancing reporting and discussion. I think that, I alluded to this before, that I think we spend too much time reporting in meetings and not enough time in discussion. What do I mean by that? Well, if we just go around the table and get people to do a work in progress report, that's all very well and good, but don't forget the individual has to prepare their report, That takes time. They're reporting on it, and then we move on. So why can't we reduce the amount of time we take to reporting to some important key performance indicators? We don't need long-winded reports in meetings. I readily recognise the need to have reports, but I just don't think they should be long-winded because to me it's just not necessary to have long-winded reports as such. The other thing that's important about meetings is that we don't have enough discussion in meetings. We're too busy being accountable. We're too busy making sure that people are dotting I's and crossing T's. But we're not spending enough time talking about the way we approach situations, how we might do things different, how we might do things better, how we might continuously improve, how we might cut costs. We're not doing those things, and that's a real problem. So what we need to do is we need to start having more dialogue in meetings and less reporting. So there's a thought for you. I would estimate, in my experience in local government, that I would estimate that, and I might be again under exaggerating this, that I would say it's like an 80-20, 80% reporting and 20% discussion. 80-20. I reckon it should be 50-50. So 50% reporting, 50% discussion and resolution. To me, that's probably where it should be. So what sort of things can you talk about? Well, there's heaps of stuff that you can talk about. There are critical incidents that go on every day. There are circumstances that need to be brought to the attention of the meeting that we need to discuss and resolve how we deal with it. We have interpersonal cooperation. We all know in local government that cross-functional communication is very poor, and we all because local government's very siloed. So, you know, one of the topics of conversation might be how do we improve our cross-functional communication, right? What about a climate review for the team? How's the team travelling? How can we do things better? What sort of things do we need to consider when we're running our meetings? All of these things are open to discussion. They're not a waste of time. They're critically important. There might be people in the team, for example, who have got great skills or dealt with situations in a wonderful way. How about we get them to do a brief report at the meeting so that we can all learn from their experience? Okay, there's heaps of things that we can do. So have a think about how that might work for yourselves as such. Let's look at the next key thing. I think you should be using critical incidents to have your discussions. In other words, what sort of circumstances or situations that have occurred over the last, I don't know, since the last meeting that were worthy of being brought up in the meeting. And this isn't about passing the buck or blaming people. It's really about using it as an opportunity to learn and consider how we might tackle similar situations in the future. So those things are always ripe for discussion, but often I think managers sweep them under the carpet or think that it's not appropriate to bring them up, and so we won't really talk about it. So no one really learns anything from a critical incident. And it's not just negative things either. There are positive things that occur that could be open for conversation in a meeting and how we might build or capitalise on it. So there's a heap of things there that can be used to be discussed in a meeting. Now, I think it's really, really important that everyone on the team implicitly understands what each other's role is in the team. Now, I know everyone's got a job description and it's all written down there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else around the table has got a real clarity and appreciation of the roles of other people in the team. So here's a couple of things you might like to try. If you're a team leader or a supervisor or a coordinator or a manager, why don't you go around the room next meeting and say to people, if you had to explain in one sentence what you get paid to do, and you couldn't give people a job title, and you could only use one sentence, what would you say? Or another way of putting it is, if you were at a barbecue and somebody asked you what you did, but you couldn't say where you worked or the title of what you did, what would you say? Now that's a really good question. And then of course you go around the room and have a listen to what everyone said. So let's say they're all let's say they're all CSOs. So we go around, we talk to all the CSOs, and all of them have different, they give you different answers. That in itself becomes interesting, doesn't it? That we've got everyone giving different answers, and it might not be clear. People might not even be clear about what the answer is that they've given. Some people will struggle with that if you ask them that question. You know, what do you get paid to do? Now, I'll give you an example. I was working in a local government environment not too long ago, and I went around the table to a group of managers, and I asked them all, the question, what do you get paid to do? And what I found absolutely fascinating was that as we went around the table, not one of the 6 people around the table had mentioned anything about people. So they mentioned all about the services that they offered and the systems that they had to undertake and the processes and everything else, but nobody mentioned people. And at the end of the 6th presentation, which was just a one-liner about what you do, I actually said, look, I just observed something interesting. During that very enlightening sharing of information about what you do, I did not hear once anybody say anything about people. And you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was deadly silent. They knew that they had overlooked probably one of the most important roles, which of course is working with and through other people. But none of them mentioned it. They were too busy talking about the minutiae of their role. So another thing that you could try in a meeting that's really important is you could actually get somebody, particularly if it's a cross-functional team, and I know they're rare in local government, but if you actually ask people to share with others around the table what they did, what some of the challenges were in their role, and some of the support that they needed in order to do their job effectively, that in itself can be very enlightening, can be a very powerful sharing and exchanging of information. So don't underestimate the power of being able to clarify roles. Now, this is particularly relevant to those of you who work in the outdoors in local government. Standing meetings are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The reason why they're brilliant is that they don't take very long. No one likes standing around, so what happens is the business of the meeting is often much shorter than it would be if we were sitting around a table. So at the beginning of a day, if you got all of the people around to talk about the jobs and the allocation of the jobs for the day, you could get that done very, very quickly by having a standing meeting. That can be very, very powerful. So there's a place for that because no one wants to be standing around. It can get uncomfortable. So just food for thought. Standing meeting could always work for you. Okay, the next key point is about the agenda. I think if it's worth meeting, it's worth having an agenda. And now, look, if 2 people meet in a corridor and they decide to have a spontaneous meeting as a result of them meeting in the corridor, then obviously you don't need an agenda. But any prepared meeting, if it's worth meeting, it's worth preparing. So I think it's really important to do that. Now, it shows a respect as well for the people that are in the meeting, that if you're the leader and you've taken the trouble to put together an agenda, then it shows that you have respected other people's time to a point where you're attempting, at least, to have a productive meeting. So having an agenda is important. A couple of things about agendas that can be very useful. I often think that people pack too much onto their agendas. Now, I guess you only have to think of local government in council meetings, for example, but I think managers sometimes do this too. So I think a good rule of thumb is you make sure that the number of things on the list is not excessive. And I don't know what excessive is, you know, whether it's 5 items or 3 items or 2. I suppose it very much depends on what's being discussed. The second important thing about a meeting agenda, and a very easy to do idea, but it staggers me how few do it, is at the end of each, you put them in priority list, right? So the most important thing should be discussed first, and the least most important thing in the context of all the agenda items gets discussed last. Now this means that if the meeting has to finish on time, which it should, and you've only got up to agenda item number 4 and you've got 5 and 6 still to discuss, you can carry over agenda items 5 and 6 to the next meeting. It just seems like common sense, but because they're not critically important to the meeting, they can in fact be afforded an opportunity to be able to be addressed at another meeting. Now the other little tip that is really useful with agendas is that after each item you put a simple number which denotes the amount of minutes that it should take to discuss. So I might have you know, item number 2, and then underneath item number 2 I have a bracket, and then I have a 20 in the middle of it, and then I have a closer bracket. What that indicates is that I've allocated 20 minutes of discussion to that particular item. And if you do that, it helps you with your planning because you can work out how many things you can discuss in a meeting. You can also work out your priorities, and the other thing that's very powerful with that is that you can then move the conversation on very quickly. If someone says to you, or they're waffling on, which isn't uncommon, is it? People waffling about all sorts of things. You can easily just say to those people, look, we've only got 20 minutes on this, so I would ask you in your comments to be very brief. Okay, so that's a good way of moving the conversation on, and it's, you know, they don't feel as if you're shutting them down. You're just really getting on with the meeting, which is really important. So agenda items are important. There's a school of thought that says that general business shouldn't go on an agenda item. I tend to agree. I think if it's not important enough to be raised prior to the meeting, then we don't go there, unless it's an exceptional circumstance, of course. But so, because sometimes a general business can take longer than the actual business has been planned, because people can just casually waltz in and you know, talk about something that that's on their mind in general business, and they didn't have the courtesy of talking to the manager and getting it on the agenda as an item. So I think there's a lot of you know, I think there are a lot of those sort of circumstances that occur. So agendas are important. I think that one of the most underestimated skills in meetings, and one that I think is hugely beneficial, is to have a summary at the end of the meeting. Now I know in some cases people take minutes. In lots of your meetings that's probably not the case, but that's okay. But I think what's a very good, instead of rotating the chair, how about we just get a person in our team who will summarise the key points that have been raised, and at the end of the meeting they can then summarise the key points in the meeting. Now that's very, very good if you give that to the right person. So if you've got somebody who's very good at detail, sorting the wheat from the chaff, has a nous about identifying what the key factors are in a team, there's your person. And get them to summarise the meeting. And it's a great way to finish because basically everyone walks out the door with a list of things that have been achieved in the meeting, which is obviously helpful. Now, think about it. Who's best? It doesn't matter what position they hold. Who's somebody that's got a natural aptitude in your team for being able to do something like that? That in itself is an interesting question. And ask them if they would be prepared to do that. It's probably one of their strengths, and if it is a strength, they probably won't mind doing it. All right, so keep the questions and comments coming in, folks. Moving right along. Another thing or another concept that's really important in meetings that often gets overlooked is that, you know, the longer a meeting goes, the less effective it's going to be. And that's the truth of it. So my suggestion to you is that an hour-long meeting is a good rule of thumb. So if something can't get discussed in an hour, I think there's some problems. An hour is a fairly long time for a very focused team. So think about all the content we're covering in this 1 hour broadcast today. An hour is a reasonable chunk of time. Of course, an hour is nothing if we waste the time in the meeting and just descend into idle chit-chat. That makes a big difference in another way. But what that chart's showing you is that decisions, you know, important decisions should be made early in the life of a meeting. And that's why I suggest that on agenda items we discuss the most important things first while people are fresh and ready to go, because sooner or later their effectiveness will drop off and therefore their decision-making ability will not be at its peak. So something to think about, but I think an hour-long meeting is fine. Now, another thing to think about is the way the room or the meeting is set up. Now, some cases you can't do anything about this because all you've got is a conference table with a lot of chairs around it, which is the one down here in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's how the meeting's set up. That's fine. If that's what you've got to deal with, then that's okay. But just also be aware that the way a room is set up will have a huge bearing on the type of information flow and general effectiveness of a meeting. So if you start at the top on the left-hand side, you've got theatre style. That is basically everyone sitting in rows. Perhaps there's a bit of a gap in the middle for people to walk down. You've got a few dignitaries out the front, and what this sort of meeting leads to is a very formal arrangement. So the power in this meeting is clearly resides in the 4 people sitting at the top table, and everyone else is facing them. So it's a very, it creates a power situation for those who perhaps want to maintain power. The classroom style, which is the next one on the right-hand side, or just moving around clockwise, of course the only difference there between that and the theatre is the fact that we have desks or writing spaces. So again, it creates a sense of formality. It basically denotes that the person at the front of the room is the most important person in the room. It stifles communication between team members because each person's sitting at one of those 6 desks, and whilst they may talk to each other, they probably aren't going to talk to other teams. So it's great for theatre and classroom. It's great for conveying information. So if there's some information flow that needs to come from the leaders or council through to officers of council, then theatre and classroom is probably the way to go. The third one there, moving across the page, is the U-shape. Now you often see this a lot in training courses. So the good news about this is that people are actually facing you, well, at least the people on the left and the right are facing each other directly. So it kind of creates a bit of camaraderie in the team, and it also creates better communication across the team. And again, the person at the front's still in charge, but it creates a bit more communication flow. So if you were thinking of having a discussion in a team meeting, that mightn't be a bad approach at all, the U-shape. Of course, if you're meeting off-site, you can actually ask the people who are running the venue how you'd like it set up. The conference table, of course, is the typical meeting arrangement that we see, where people sitting around a table, and that's great in the sense that people are closer together, so there's a sense of harmony. They're facing each other in most cases, so communication is enhanced, and it's probably the optimum style of meeting for a team. The banquet style, which you'll often see when you're going to conference dinners and so forth, it can be very effective in the sense that you've got 6 teams who may need to work together effectively. So if you put those people around the tables as part of that team at different stages, of course, the manager could stop talking and ask the tables to confer or talk to each other about something, and that can be very powerful. And of course, cabaret. I like cabaret. In fact, to me, I think it's the best format, but bear in mind, a lot of my meetings are about informing and educating. But the reason I like this is it gives people a chance in the teams to build teamwork up and create dialogue amongst themselves as much as it does between themselves and myself or whoever. So it's a great way of creating maximum engagement in a team. So I'd like you to think about, how do you set up your meetings? Do you have any other options open to you? And if you do, which might be the best way to go? Okay, moving right along. Look, one of the things that I strongly recommend that you consider is guest speakers. Now, I don't mean, spending thousands of dollars on motivational speakers to come in and address your team. That's not what I'm on about. I'm talking about people inside council. Why couldn't you get people from other parts of the organisation to come into your meeting and present on some interesting topic? Like there might be somebody in HR who, for example, could talk about an interesting topic, or somebody might be talking about the new payroll system. So get someone in from accounts to come in and talk about it. Or what's going on in the outdoor workforce? Could you invite somebody in to come and talk about that? Now, that adds stimulation to the meeting. It helps to inform the people in the meeting, and sometimes that guest speaker could actually come from the meeting itself. So each of the people that you lead have got special strengths and talents, and some of those strengths and talents would be very, very useful if shared with your team members. So why not go up and ask them if they could present briefly at one of the future meetings in order to create change. So a guest speaker is an excellent way. Now, if you've got someone from out of town, of course, use speakerphone or now these days Skype, whatever might work for you. But guest speakers are very powerful, and I don't think we again utilise them anywhere near enough, because they're the ones that will normally leave the lasting message, assuming they're good speakers, and probably will have the greatest impact on the most number of people who are at the meeting wanting to contribute. So think about how you might incorporate guest speakers in. Okay, moving right along. Okay, now I suppose the question is, how do you shut people up who are long-winded in meetings? And that's been the perennial problem for anyone running a meeting for a very, very long time. Well, long time, perennial, forever. What I think you should do and get good at is to learn to paraphrase. So somebody's gone on and on and on and on about a topic, and you think it would be very impolite to interrupt them, but by the same token they're annoying the living daylights out of you because they're taking forever to get to the point. As soon as they draw breath, say these words. In other words, and then you can finish it off. So in other words, you're saying that you were told two separate things, and that led to the confusion that resulted in us not being able to get the right answer to the ratepayer. All right, so what I've done is I've effectively summarised or paraphrased what the person has said. Now, we do that for three reasons, and they're on you can see them in front of you. The first reason is to check to make sure that we've got the message correct, because you can be assured if you haven't, they'll probably correct you, right? So the first reason we do this is to check that we have, in fact, heard them correctly. And you'd be surprised how often you try this. You'd be surprised how often you get people will actually say that's not entirely accurate. The second reason we do this is we're letting the speaker know that we've heard them. Obviously, if you can paraphrase what someone said, maybe they've taken 15 minutes to say it, and you've been able to paraphrase it in a sentence, then you've nailed it. You've nailed it. And they themselves know that they have been heard. And not only have they been heard, they have been understood. And that's a good way of shutting someone up, because one of the reasons that people want to talk and talk and talk and talk is that they don't feel that they're having any impact. So they just keep talking. And the third reason, particularly if you're running meetings, is so that you can move the meeting on. Because once you paraphrase somebody, we don't have to go over old ground again, do we? We're already there. So you can move the conversation on to the next item on the agenda. So there's a lot of scope for paraphrasing. So let's have a look at some ways of getting people involved in meetings, because often people come to meetings and sit there and say nothing, and then other people, of course, will completely dominate the meeting. And of course, both of those responses are not what you want. So just in the last few minutes, let's have a look at some of these things. One of the things you could use is a team values charter. And I developed this, as you can see down the bottom, a couple of years ago in one of my books. And I found it's really powerful, and the teams really get something out of it. So you simply base the team charter on 5 questions. So you go round the table and you simply ask each person, making sure they've got pen and paper, you need to do the same thing, to respond to these 5 questions. First question, what's the one value that's important when we meet as a team? Right, so let's say I said respect. What does it mean? In other words, what's my definition? Respect means to listen without prejudice to the views of other people might be my response. Why is it important? I want to feel, this is me responding to this, I want to feel respected when I'm part of this team, and that I feel that my contribution is being listened to. Next question, what behaviours would demonstrate this value? I think one of the things that would demonstrate this value is being quiet and allowing me to finish my point without interruption. And finally, what behaviours would violate this? Well, of course, interrupting people or making assumptions based on previous experience that are negative. So once you've created this charter, you can actually then hold your team members accountable for these values that have been identified in the charter. You'll be surprised how effective that is, and please don't get confused with the organisational or the strategic direction or the organisational values that perhaps people just see as a plaque on the wall. This becomes very relevant because everyone's had a say in it, and you'll be surprised how effective it is. So that's one thing you can do to engage people, and then you be the upholder of those values. Now, one simple thing, and I just don't get it, I just don't get this. Why not start your meeting with a win for the week? Why not simply go around the table, starting with you, and just say, what's your win for the week? Now, you'll find people struggle with this and they won't be able to come up with anything, which is absolutely ridiculous. A week's a long time at work. Surely one thing in that whole week went well, and I know for sure it did. It's just that they're probably just focused on all the negative things, but they can't actually think about what went well. So you try this once or twice, go around the table, it only takes a couple of minutes. You'll be amazed at the upward spiral of positivity it creates. And then we can start talking about all the negative things, but just even if you just did that, nothing more, you'd be a long way ahead. So guys, that brings us pretty much to end. You've been a bit quiet today, I've noted, but never mind. I might have been saying things that made a lot of sense to you, or maybe not. But anyway, what I'd like you to do for homework, well, of course, we won't be meeting again. This is it. So I'd like you to apply some of these key things. So implement some of these new approaches in your meeting. I'd like you to try that because it's, you know, again, this is a meeting, and really the critical thing in this meeting is to get you to do something different as a result of this meeting. So try something, whether it's win for the week or a team values charter or using numbers against agenda items, whatever it might be, just try it out. You'll be surprised how effective it'll be. So that's the homework, which isn't too onerous, because if you're running meetings, you have to do these things anyway, so you might as well do things differently. So guys, I've enjoyed working with you over this last several months. I hope you found something useful. Drop me a line. Let me know. You know, what you got out of the program, what was effective. It's always useful for me to know that. Or if you've got feedback around anything that could be improved, or you know, something I'm not doing, or I could be doing more of, or doing less of, or whatever. Because this is pretty much in its infancy. This is the first series we've had for local government. The second one's already booked up, which is wonderful news. But if you've got other people in your organisation that would benefit from the Lunch and Learn series, then contact LGAQ and we'll get you registered for a very reasonable price. It can be very, very effective. But just before I finish up, let's do a quick recap on the topics that I've covered, and think back to the first topic that I looked at. Whoop. Went too far there. We talked about feedback and how important it was, and your homework there was to actually go out and give 3 bits of feedback every single day. I hope you're still doing that, because all of these things should be built upon each other. So don't drop the ball on any of these things. I then asked you to try to use different forms of influence in Unit 2 or Module 2 when you're trying to influence other people. And remember, we did the influencing capabilities profile, and it gave you a bit of a perspective about your natural influencing strategy. And number 3, we were talking about the importance of having good, focused conversations with people, optimizing team performance. Number 4 was getting the best out of other people, and this is about, you know, trying some different strategies to create the environment by which people become motivated. Module 5 was about understanding people and their personalities, and it was all about the platinum rule, about treating people how they want to be treated, not treating people how you want to be treated. And of course today we've gone through the facilitation of effective meetings. So guys, as I said, thank you for your kind feedback, those of you who have done that. I'm more than open to receive emails from you. You'll get one more bit of correspondence from me, which will basically be the slides and also the recording, so that you know, you can go back over this particular module if you want to, just to get some of the ideas out of it. But I wish you all the very best, and I just want to say thank you again, wherever you are in Queensland, and we've got local governments from all over Queensland, and I just want to really say thank you for your patronage. This has been proven to be a very popular opening series, so I think we're about to embark on a number of different topics as well. So thanks guys, and wish you all the very best. Thank you. Thank you.